Hi, this is Michelle Sam from Sammy Wong's Kitchen. Today I'm not really going to be giving you a recipe, but it's more like tips. With the holidays coming up, many people do either turkey or buy a ham or make prime rib. Our family tradition is to have prime rib every Christmas. And for decades, I used to do a dry aged prime rib, and it started off as a 2-week dry aged prime rib, and I kept pushing the envelope, and eventually I think I had over a 40-day dry aged prime rib. What I wanted to do in this video is to give you some options to have the most amazing prime rib. And being from South Africa, we love our steaks and braais, so we love good beef. So what's the difference between the wet aged and dry aged prime rib? And why age prime rib? Well, aging just means allowing the actual meat to, in essence, decay more. So over time, your meat becomes really tender. Now, there is a difference in flavor between the wet age and dry age. Dry aging, you put it in a refrigerator at a certain temperature, and the air leaches out the moisture in the meat. So what happens is that the flavor is really delicious. It's really this intense beefy flavor. However, the flip side to that is that it ends up being drier. In dry aging, the edge of the beef is really dry, so you're going to have to cut that off. And I would say you lose about 25% of your meat. Wet aging, on the other hand, is where you age it in a vacuum sealed environment like this, in a cryovac environment. And over time, it breaks down in its own juices. So last year I decided, okay, I really wanted to try the difference between a dry age and a wet age, and I wanted to have this comparison. And I'm like, okay, what's the best way to do wet aging? And I realized that not everybody in the household environment can wet age. But I realized, well, we can purchase the entire cryovac piece of prime rib instead of having the butcher slice it up for us. And then what we can do is do whatever we please. So the reason I'm doing this video is right now, around Thanksgiving, is when they have the prime ribs on sale. And it is actually the perfect time to buy your prime rib for Christmas. Why? Well, what you need to know is the pack date of your wet aged prime rib. Now, what is the pack date? The pack date is actually when your cryovac was packed. And on the actual package, you cannot tell when it was packed. But you really have to get to know your butcher. And when you know him by name, he will do a lot of favors for you. Well, my buddy at the grocery store, I asked him to go into the fridge and to find me a good piece of prime rib, and then also to tell me the pack date. He actually wheeled out a box of prime rib, and I picked my own prime rib, and he also showed me what the pack date was. So the pack date is what will determine how long it's been aging. The butcher said he's actually eaten prime rib that has been aged for 6 months. I think 6 months is a little too long to be having a big thing of meat in your refrigerator. But from Thanksgiving to Christmas is 1 month. And it's a perfect amount of time just to keep a large cryovac in your refrigerator for the holidays, and it's on sale. So you're like, well, I am never going to eat this much meat. And believe me, my family is not going to eat this much meat. But I figured out ways you can take this on sale and then be able to carve it up, so to speak, so that you can use some for your prime rib. You use some for maybe ribs or making soup stock or the au jus, and also being able to cut it so you get some really great parts for barbecue. Okay, so here's a wet aged prime rib roast. I'm gonna cut it. It's been aging for about 8 weeks. And I'm going to take it out of fryer rack. So here is your rib roast, and here is where you can actually see the ribs. And sometimes you have a larger rib cage, and then these ones are pretty small. And if there is a bone, I would average about a pound per person, because you're going to be accounting for the bone. But this time with the wet age, I am actually going to cut the roast, debone it, and then just roast the roast deboned, and then use the ribs for barbecue. So let's cut the rib roast. This is probably going to be about 10-pound roast right here. And with a sharp knife, just cut between the ribs. And you see, unlike the dry rib, this is really wet and you don't lose any of the meat. But what you gain in the actual moisture of the meat, you lose in the flavor. And here are the ribs, and I'm going to cut between the ribs here. Go as close to the bone as possible, so we're not going to be losing much meat. Or you can just use that meat for a nice succulent rib, and then you just kind of go along the edges. Here's your ribs. It's got quite a bit of meat in here. Actually, I'm going to get out most of the meat here, and 2 bones, I'm going to boil that for the au jus for the prime rib. And then I'm going to take my rough salt and sprinkle it generously over the surface of the prime rib. I'm using rough salt rather than fine salt because it's very difficult to see how much salt you're adding onto the prime rib, and you don't want it too salty. But when you use the rough salt, you can see the granules. You don't want it completely covered, but just enough so that it's going to be flavorful. And you're going to do the same thing with fresh ground pepper. And I really prefer fresh ground, and if you have a chance of making it a coarse ground, that is even preferable. Allow it to just marinate for an hour, bring it to room temperature, and then roast it on a reverse sear. So we're going to roast it on low, followed by a sear at the end. Okay, and so for these ribs, I'm going to try to get this rib meat, which is very, very tender and delicious. Just get your knife as close to the bone as possible so you don't waste it. So this rib meat is just amazing for Korean barbecue. So we have the ribs, we have the rib meat, and here in the back we have our seasoned boneless prime rib that has been wet aged for 8 weeks. And here is my rest of my prime rib that I'm not going to use because I just bought it in a cryovac, so I don't have to deal with the wet aging process. It's already wet aging in the cryovac. And what I'm going to do is cut these, vacuum seal these, and have them for steaks in the future. So that's how you can make use of a wet aged prime rib roast. More recipes can be found on sammywongsKitchen.com or social media. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks!